Hello, everybody. For those of you who are already joining, we will get things started in just a few minutes. For those of you who have just joined, we'll get things started in about one more minute. Thanks, everybody, for jumping on. All right, so let's get things kicked off here. First of all, hey, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Kevin Fremore. I'm the SVP of Media Technology and Data here at the 4As. And I'm excited to welcome a panel of folks that will be talking about helping brands drive relevance on YouTube in 2025 through a 360-degree approach. Um, YouTube is not I guess the way that they're going to speak about this, right, is that brands need to stay relevant on YouTube, not just through ad placements, but thinking holistically about creator content, organic reach, format diversity, and using the full scope of what YouTube has to offer across every screen. I'm pleased to welcome Matt Duffy. He's the CMO of Pixability. We have Brian Banks. He's the VP Director of Digital Media Strategy at Davis Elen Advertising. We have Melissa Sierra, EVP Media Integration at USIM. And we have Chris Ebmeyer, Managing Director of Media Services at AB&C. Without further ado, I will pass it over to Matt. Oh, further ado. Uh, we have a Q&A available on the side. We also have the chat. If you have questions, you can pose those there throughout the conversation today. We'll have time for Q&A as well at the end, but please feel free to drop questions for that. And now I will turn it over to Matt Duffy.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Welcome, everyone. Excited today. We have a great panel, three great panelists from three great agencies to talk to you about YouTube. For those of you that don't know Pixability, we are basically a software, data and technology company focused on YouTube, helping agencies and brands with their YouTube strategies, whether it be advertising or outside of advertising. And we fully believe that it's all about driving outcomes, right? It's not just ad results, but it's what kinds of outcomes does the brand really want from YouTube? And here's some nice examples from some of the folks that we work with. For today, Kevin teed it up pretty well. I think for today, we want to talk about how YouTube isn't just a one-trick pony. There are lots of different ways to use YouTube in an ad campaign. There are lots of different ways outside of ad campaigns. And there are lots of things to think about, going into this last quarter of our year and going into next year of how brands should be thinking of it and how agencies can help the brands think of it in different ways. So we're going to talk a little bit about best practices we're all seeing. And again, these three have seen some really interesting patterns happening over the course of this year. Then we're going to talk a little bit about inventory curation and sort of why inventory is still a very important piece of the puzzle. And then again, we'll get to this kind of like think a little bit more broadly about YouTube and the other ways that brands can be using it. So we'll kick it off a little bit with best practices, like I said. This is a known fact, but not everywhere you go that YouTube is now the number one platform in terms of reach of all the CTV platforms on TV screens, which some people say, well, you're talking about YouTube TV, right? And it's no, this is just regular old YouTube on TV screens, has a higher reach than Netflix, Disney, Prime, Paramount, all those platforms. And yet, a lot of times YouTube isn't included in, a CTV campaign, what's traditionally thought of as a CTV campaign. What we're seeing though is that people are getting smarter about not only including them in CTV campaigns, but leveraging the TV reach that YouTube has in your standard YouTube campaigns and thinking of how screens make a difference. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. Actually, this data is now aged a little bit. I know that YouTube's now 13%. So if you think of for every 100 minutes that someone's watching TV, 13 of those they're watching YouTube on their TV screens. And this is all ages. You think of it as like just young people. It's definitely skewer to a younger audience, but I certainly when I'm watching long content on YouTube, I'd rather watch it on a TV screen than on my phone. Um, and so we'll talk a little bit about best practices here. And one of the things we're seeing is this shouldn't be surprising to people, but if they're running ads on TV screens with YouTube or anything, completion rates are a thing that work really well, right, on TV screens because people are going to watch the whole ad. They're not going to know how to get out of it, to be honest, in a lot of cases. And similarly, they're not going to be great at clicking on ads on a TV screen, although it is technically possible. It's not something that people really do. So again, when you're working with your clients, keep this in mind. We're going to talk similarly about how what we're seeing in terms of best practices in shorts. But one more quick point about TV screen advertising on YouTube, and then I'd love to hear from the panel here. We're getting some TV advertisers that are coming over to YouTube, and they're still not comfortable with the whole pie of YouTube inventory, and they're saying, can we just get inventory that feels like TV content? And there are definitely ways to do that too. You can curate content, and we'll talk about this in the curation section. That is TV like content, TV quality content. So if you're advertising on Graham Norton show on TV, you should also be advertising on Graham Norton clips on YouTube and so forth. With that, I'll pause before we start talking about shorts to shoot it to the panel, and I guess maybe I'll start, Chris, if you want to start, just any kind of thoughts on how I know from working with you all that you guys think of all the different screens and all the different ways that YouTube can be helpful, but any sort of thoughts on YouTube as a TV platform that you've seen from your experience?
I think, well, first off, it's great to be here, and thrilled to be talking to everyone. But I think, for us, when we look at YouTube and especially from the inventory perspective, there is so much quality content there that we can align with for our brands. We tend to look at it as more content curators as opposed to just, straight, media performance specialists. And really because, when we're looking at or when we're looking at YouTube, we tend to look at it with this view of, is the inventory and the environment there going to enhance my brand, or will it potentially detract from it? And so we've had incredible success, looking at the curated inventory packages and the ways of aligning brands with quality inventory on the platform.
Yeah, that's great. And Brian, I know you work with some big name brands that do a lot of TV advertising too. How do they think about YouTube? Are there still some of them that are a little bit like, it's different, but they're still leveraging it, or how are they thinking of it as a TV or not a TV platform?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it definitely changed in the past couple of years with how much growth YouTube TV has seen. And I know this is about just YouTube in general, but I think just the pushing of YouTube TV and how much live sports content they have has really solidified their place as a credible, akin to TV kind of environment. And I feel like that's opened up the door for greater conversations with, the likes of like a reserve buyer doing these larger, higher quality curation of prominent premium content on YouTube because of that YouTube TV success. But they're starting to really kind of come around and really see it as applicable to a a YouTube or a TV alternative.
Absolutely. We're seeing a lot of brands of all sizes wanting sort of a reserve buy on YouTube TV, packaged in with a sort of auction buy across YouTube. Like maybe there's a sports reserve buy on YouTube TV, and they package that with also like sports content on YouTube that might be premium sports content. So that's a good thing. Melissa, any thoughts here on the TV screen?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Chris and Brian and yourself has said, but if you feel YouTube is one channel, you're leaving half the conversions on the table.
Right.
Really, quality YouTube TV isn't just about the eyes, it's about making sure that the right eyes are seeing the right story. TV is still very much at its core storytelling and brand impact. So we don't want to have that miss of an opportunity to lean into that architecture of the true brand coming through.
Absolutely. And it's a good segue into the other thing that's happened with YouTube in the last couple of years. So YouTube Shorts launched in 2021, but really didn't make it available for advertisers to directly target shorts until last year. So it's still a relatively new thing for targeting ads. Not new from a content creation standpoint. And what we've seen YouTube do in a good way, I actually, when it launched, Chris and Melissa and I have talked about this, but when it launched, we kind of thought this is just a copy of TikTok. It's going to be a feeble attempt at being like TikTok, but YouTube's done a really good job of integrating their shorts into everything. So they've already had the reach, so it's now piggybacked on all of the reach YouTube already had, and it's got a lot of incremental reach beyond the social platforms. And because of that, people are taking notice. I think in the same way that we shared some best practices for TV screens, there's sort of the converse for shorts, where if you're running on shorts, you're less likely to get good completed views. TV screen, they're probably going to watch the whole ad. Shorts, they're probably not going to watch the whole ad. They're usually flipping through a feed, right? But also conversely, you're going to get a lot of reach actually, because they're flipping through shorts in general. And this is true for a lot of the different platforms like TikTok as well. You're going to get very high reach at a low CPM. So you'll see YouTube mixing in YouTube Shorts for a lot of their reach ad formats and so forth. Chris, I know we talked about this before, but again, a little quick note on how shorts have become important to your clients.
Listen, I love shorts. I think it's the type of unit that we tend to view as sort of the elevator pitch to the TED Talk. The elevator pitch being the shorts and the TED Talk being the longer form content available on YouTube. And so we've seen a lot of our audiences moving from shorts into the longer form YouTube pieces that we have up, and it's worked quite well. And I think part of that is the mindset that people bring to YouTube, which is it's a learning mindset. I'm coming to YouTube to learn something or gain some knowledge about something. And so we tend to see people interacting with shorts in a much different fashion than we would see on some other platforms.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into some other things we're seeing on the platform, compared to TikTok, which is because of this mindset difference where TikTok can sometimes be more of an entertainment platform. Someone's waiting in line, they want to be entertained, they're watching really cool, fun videos. And in general, YouTube, it's a little bit more of a research mindset, a little bit more of I'm going to learn something, find something out. And because of that, we are seeing a bunch of campaigns that we've worked with where the awareness levels are nice from YouTube. I think it's partially because of that mindset. And this is a nice example that Melissa's been kind enough to share with us of some campaigns for Crunch Fitness, a great client of theirs. Melissa, you want to talk to this a little bit for your client?
Yes, it was really important for us to understand how short form content was really driving cultural relevance across both platforms. And we were really excited to see the lift in awareness, but also the lift in familiarity and ad recall just as much. being able to rapidly test, drive micro conversions is really what Shorts has lent itself in terms of helping Crunch Fitness dominate the landscape that we see out there in a congested marketplace for health and fitness. And really, we
Yeah.
see Shorts as the opportunity to capitalize on scale, trends, and attention within seconds.
Yeah, and what it brings up too, though, which is our next point to talk about, is how YouTube is a lot of different things now, which can be a good thing, but also a challenge for all of us, right? And Brian, I'm gonna look to your thoughts on this a little bit, but this was from a study we did of agencies, and some of you in the audience may have responded to this study where we said, well, what is YouTube now? And of course, it's many things. It's a standalone video platform. It's a connected TV platform, and now it's a social media shorts platform where they wouldn't have answered that way, 8 years ago. I think this light green and this peach bubble wouldn't have been here. It's now becoming more of a direct response channel too, this little light blue bubble, which we'll talk about in a minute. But how as an agency can you take advantage of all of these things? Sometimes agencies are siloed, and this tends to happen sometimes in bigger holdcos, but it can happen in any size agency where you might have a social team that, well, we're not running YouTube right now because we're just doing TikTok and Insta, and the YouTube team's a separate team because they're more of a standalone AV team or something like that. But how do you, as an agency, Brian, how do you make sure that whether the teams are one or not, you kind of take advantage of each of these different things that YouTube can be to a brand?
So it's not without challenge, I'll say that much. But I think we've done a really good job of kind of understanding what sort of channels different groups can kind of fall into. The standalone has been around for decades at this point, so it's that's just kind of par for the course with any sort of online premium video. But with shorts and it really kind of emerging as a really competent social platform, and with, like I was mentioning before, YouTube TV really solidifying it as a solid CT, I mean, objectively solid CTV option. We've had kind of the respective buyers that are responsible for those particular channels to own that. So our broadcast buyers eventually become streaming buyers, incorporating that into their broadcast mix, and then they pick up YouTube TV as an alternate to some of the other options that are available. The standalone buys kind of live within our digital plans, and then with the social buys that can cross a number of different camps. But I think the way to make sure it's all kind of cohesive is just to communicate about the work that different individuals are doing, especially on the creative front, who they're targeting and who they're messaging, and kind of what the overarching objective is, so that all of those channels can kind of work to their strengths and continue to tee each other up. And just making sure that we have really appropriate metrics for each channel, as you're not going to expect the same performance of a YouTube TV buy versus a short, and the price of each channel justifies that. But I think it's just open communication, moving away from the silos, as you were kind of mentioning, and just making sure that we're all kind of aligned with who's doing what creative is available, and kind of what the overarching objective for that brand is.
Yeah, that's great. And that kind of gets to our overarching point of today, that YouTube's not a one-trick pony. YouTube, this sort of 360-degree view of it, and not being siloed. And we work with some agencies that feel like they're stuck in this. We're just running these ads for them, and we're kind of doing this one-off thing for them. And it's having that approach that Brian mentioned, and that I know Chris and Melissa, your firms both have, of there's all these different ways we can use it. Let's use it based on the goals and the budget and so forth. So this little light blue bubble in the right-hand corner of people using it more and more for demand gen or direct response gets to something else that we're happening. I'll show this case study in a second too, but something else that's happening is Google has come out with these ad formats that some people call AI ad formats, so forth. And demand gen is one that's very relevant to YouTube, where it's not just YouTube, it's also using Discovery and Gmail and other things outside of Google. But basically, their thing is, give us your ad creative and we'll find the performance for you. And what we're finding is it does do that. It does find good performance for advertisers. So if you're looking for clicks, if you're looking for performance, it will find it. The challenge, and where some folks aren't as happy about it, is you lose control over where your ads are running. And for some brands, that's fine. For some brands we work with, they say, listen, we don't care where it runs. We want this performance. Most of the brands we work with are like, we do care where it runs, and we actually want to know more about it. And so this ad at Digiday did some months back about agencies saying like, hey, we like that you have this performance ad format, but it's also we don't like the lack of control. I know, Brian, when we talked about this, you said you've seen similar frustrations and so forth with Performance Max, which is similar to demand gen. It just even goes a little bit even more outside into search and so forth. But talk a little bit about what you guys have seen with that.
Um, I mean, I would love to take the opportunity to bash on PMax, but I mean, I think fortunately, especially with demand gen, or at least with what Google's kind of been piecing together, I think they recognize that some of the platforms, um, and I know when we were talking before, I was kind of talking about the navigation example, but they're recognizing that there are certain platforms that really shouldn't be included in a PMax or a demand gen model, and they're coming up with some creative solutions to help segment that out. Now, it's not perfect, and I still don't like the black box nature of it, hence why work with a partner like you guys, is it gives us quite a bit more visibility into where we're actually serving, the channels that we're serving on, and things of that nature. But I think they're starting to see the light, that you can't just bucket everything into one singular box and expect people to just be happy with the lack of transparency. So I'm happy to see that
Yeah.
change come to fruition.
Yeah, and Chris or Melissa, anything you've seen for these ad formats or?
It's interesting. I actually had a client reach out on Monday who said, we got a call from Google about demand gen. What do you know about it? So just interesting timing.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, very much to Brian's point, the black box nature of it really, it doesn't, I wouldn't say concerns us, but I think for some clients where we need to protect the brand, it's something that, we tend to, work around. But yes, to your point, if we have straight performance and, they don't mind,
Yeah.
it's something that we could look at.
Yeah, and what we suggest is like Brian said, is try to find a way, and we have a solution that we help folks with where it's showing a little bit more transparency. It's also you can use exclusions. So I always tell people whether you're working with us or not, you can use exclusions in demand gen campaigns. You can't very effectively use inclusions. You can't very effectively say, here are the channels I want to run on, but you can say, please at least make sure we're not on these channels. So that's something we always suggest to people. And then if you can find a way to also dissect a little bit what's working and what's not, again, these AI ad formats aren't as good as telling you what worked. They tell you it worked. And so those are some of the challenges we're seeing. The example I wanted to tell of a good example of a campaign that kind of had this 360 approach was this nice campaign out of Ignited that they did for Chicken of the Sea that we helped them with, where it did a really good job of taking advantage of TV screens and shorts all in one campaign. They had a really good strategy just for their TV screens and a really good strategy for shorts that were different but complementary. And they had great creative from the creative firm they worked with. And so I know agencies aren't always the media agencies aren't always responsible for that and sometimes can be frustrated with that, but they had this great creative with Jessica Simpson and her daughter recreating this moment from a decade ago when Jessica Simpson said, is chicken of the sea chicken or tuna? And it was a really fun kind of callback to that thing. So again, there are great examples out there to share, and all three of these agencies are doing this in a really smart way. And I think that's part of what we wanted to share with you all today. All right, so that tees up really well into YouTube inventory curation, which we talked about a bit. This is kind of a fun you know, statement that we use to just make people realize the volume of content on YouTube. Everyone knows that YouTube is exploding with content, but if you put it in mathematical terms with 500 hours of video uploaded every minute, like that doesn't make any sense to people. But when you put it in the terms of a Netflix worth of content every hour, that means that every day, every 24-hour span, 24 new Netflix's worth of content are created on YouTube. And that gives you a sense of how just impossible it is for a human to kind of make sure that they're on the right channels. A typical campaign could run on 100,000 channels. And so if you feel like you're going to go into Google's native platforms and be able to control what 100,000 channels you're going to run on, you're sorely mistaken. But there are sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it's not. When it's not okay is and all three of these agencies have prevented this, but you can find that there's waste. You can find that either you're running on content that's not suitable, that the brand would not have chosen for various reasons, or you're running on content that's not engaging the audience, it's not performing, and that could be for a lot of different reasons, or it's both. Which is the worst case scenario, is like this was unsuitable and it didn't drive any performance. Why the heck are we spending dollars on this? And so how do you, as an agency, find a way to prevent what we're seeing is this cascading effect, where if you're on content that's not relevant or suitable, again, part of what we're talking about today is driving relevance on YouTube, you're going to get lower view rates at the top of the funnel. You're then going to get even lower click-through rates and then even lower conversions. It kind of cascades down. And so I guess, Melissa, I want to start with you. Like, when you're working with clients, obviously some brands are more worried about where they're running their campaigns than others. But how do you kind of help them address the issue of controlling what feels uncontrollable on YouTube?
Yeah, we go back to the old age of saying the devil's in the details and that all inventory isn't created equal. So smart media investment really comes down to precision and context. And brands really need to optimize for not only the right shows, but devices and time slots just as much. How do we seek out those unique opportunities to align with the right content? What are the cues telling us back?
Yeah. Oh, you froze a bit, Melissa. You still with us? I think she froze for a bit. Brian, I know you. Oh, you froze for a little bit, Melissa,
Sorry,
but I think you're back.
sorry about that.
That's
Um,
okay.
so we don't take a beat to actually look at the qualitative
Yeah.
information back and how can we really nuance what is next for our audiences, but also how the brands can capitalize on certain macro and micro moments from those episodes.
Yeah, that's great. And Brian, I know you talked a little bit. I think the other part of this is not just thinking contextually, but there are a lot of things you can do geographically, behaviorally, et cetera. I think Brian, you mentioned this before, that's obviously a big way that you think of the whole big picture of targeting on YouTube, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can kind of comment on that. Well, I guess I'll comment on that, and then I have another point that I wanted to make. But I think the thing that's really interesting with so much of our business, a lot of our business is really locally focused. So we do, tier two McDonald's and Toyota, and it's really about understanding the locale of, the different nuances of a specific geographic region, the certain wants and flavors and tastes and things. And so by really curating specific content, we can report back to the brand in each of their respective markets of like, these are what people are looking at in your market. These are the things that are popping off. These are the intersegments that are really resonating. And so when we're trying to, lend value from how we understand the local markets, we can lean on partners like YouTube or Pixability and whatnot to give us those local insights in addition to our own research. But when it's substantiated by another third party and outside source, it helps promote that claim of, look, we really understand who your customers are. One point I did want to make on this slide, though, as opposed to looking at the cascading negative effect, I think looking at the cascading positive effect. When you really curate an audience and you really focus on relevancy, we regularly use a partner called Adelaide for attention tracking. And I know Lumen is another big one, and there's some other companies that are really making some strides in that space. But we have specific benchmarks for each type of media channel. Standard display may be really relatively low. High impact kind of bumps that up a little bit. Online video, climbs higher and higher. But after we've really started focusing on, curating content on YouTube and focusing on the audience and focusing on what's resonating and performing, we've had to create a benchmark score just for YouTube because it blows everything else out of the water. And I think it's a combination of just the sheer volume of content, the relevancy of that content, how you can really pinpoint something that is, targeted to that individual's core interest. They're actively seeking it out with it being a massive search engine. The quality of the content's really high. I mean, it really is a perfect storm for you getting in front of someone with a passion point that they have actively sought out. So there's a huge while there's a huge downfall, there's also a huge benefit if you're approaching it with the right mindset.
No, that's a great point. This slide could be repositioned, the converse, the positives of doing it the right way from the beginning. I absolutely agree. And I think the other thing that this reminds people too is that there are a bunch of different ways to look at curation on YouTube right now. These sort of brownish bubbles are kind of the standard ways that someone might run a campaign. With demand gen, as we already talked about, you're kind of like letting Google do all the work. You're saying, and it's going to go everywhere. You're going to run on hundreds of thousands of channels, but they're going to come back with some good performance for you, but you have to be okay with that. So you're going to see scale and performance probably be high, but your sort of control and suitability and relevance might be super low. Now, you could also, on the other end of the spectrum, you could say, to Brian's point, you could say, I just want to run on these 100 channels. And then you'd feel really confident of that it's relevant, that it's suitable, and you can show your client, listen, feel safe. Here are the channels you're running on. And clients want that. And that's a hard thing to get on YouTube sometimes, of like really showing them where they ran, right? And then there's some things in the middle, like you can just run on YouTube Select, but YouTube Select usually lets you buy big like tranches of things like we talked about earlier. Like here's a big sports tranche, but you don't really feel as much like, whether it's the right sports ones and so forth. And the transparency is a little bit foggy. Standard YouTube tier advertising is usually where you're running across a big set of YouTube inventory, but you're having a little more control over behavioral, over location and stuff like that, which is again a great thing. But all of these things have their disadvantages. What we're finding now is that agentic curation, and we have a good new solution in this that we just launched called Pixie, where if you have the right data, you can get scale and relevance. It's impossible for a human to get scale and relevance in any good way. So instead of picking 100 small, a small list of 100 channels by human, think of an agent going out, and like you had thousands of agents going out and finding 100 channels for you each. And so you've got this huge, this huge set of relevant channels. So we highly recommend to folks that if they're running in any of these ways, if it makes sense, go for it. We do all 4 of these things for folks when it makes sense. But agentic is going to change the game when it comes to video advertising in general. We're seeing this starting to be applied to CTV as well, and it's going to be very, very cool. Google will, of course, have agentic curation someday, but they also only share certain data with us, right? So you need the data that can kind of find the right content for you. All right, so we've talked a little bit about best practices of YouTube's ad formats. We've talked a little bit about curation, which is, kind of another best practice. Let's finish a little bit on this. This is kind of like a little bit future looking at, let's all of us work together. And I know Brian, Chris, and Melissa all agreed on this, that even if your agency isn't set up in a certain way to handle all of the ways that YouTube could help with brands, we can all be more strategic about that. And what we like to remind people is that for a brand, advertising is just one piece of the puzzle. And even within advertising, they might be doing advertising more for sort of branding, and then they might care more about brand suitability and not use demand gen and really maybe do a small inclusion list like we talked about. For performance, they might be like, I don't care about the brand suitability. I want demand gen. I want so forth. So those are almost like 2 separate pieces of the pie. But then you've got all these other things that YouTube is amazing for that a lot of brands aren't doing right now. One is organic strategy. For all of your clients, we always tell people, take a look at their YouTube channel. What are they doing in their YouTube channel? Do they have amazing ad creative and they have just horrible video content on their YouTube channel? And sometimes that's a frustrating conversation to have. So, pick your battles. But are they using YouTube Insights in a smart way? And we'll show examples of that. And even more importantly now, creator campaigns. We're finding more and more YouTube used to be left out of a lot of creator campaign conversation years ago because people would think of just TikTok and Insta as the creator platforms. And now YouTube has come a long, long way. And even like a lot of people are saying, actually, the YouTube creators feel more trusting because they're doing longer form content. They're not just like entertaining us. They might be reviewing. Like when I was buying a new couch, I went and watched a bunch of creators saying like these are the best couches for this style and stuff like that. So again, this concept is not one that is easily achieved either, but it's something that I think we all aspire to talk to brands about. Melissa, I know you and I have talked a lot about this, so talk a little bit about how you want to be helpful to your clients in more than just ads and just YouTube strategy in general.
Yeah, this is an area I'm really passionate about. Creators have a pulse on what matters the most to your customers. And in order to fit in natively and move your brand from attention to intention with these audiences, you really have to be part of that ecosystem. Just as much as we're talking about YouTube being its own ecosystem, your brand needs to be at that epicenter and think synergistically across that message point and storytelling. Long gone are the days where brands have moved to this new place of being media properties themselves, but also creators are brand entities within themselves. How do you get around that ecosphere of them mentioning your brand in particular and capitalize on their strength of ambassadorship and influence that they've built upon themselves to really work into both the branded, polished content, but then the user generated formats just as much?
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things we're seeing is that not a lot of ad campaigns are tied to creator campaigns, where you could be choosing creators for creator campaigns that are either the same or different from creators that you're running ads on. And so we're getting more brands directly talking to us about, hey, we want to tie these things together. And one of the ways you can do that in the same way that you can use agentic to curate inventory, you can use it to help you find creators. And you can do these cool things like we had a food brand come to us and say, hey, Nick D. Giovanni is one of our favorite food creators that we work with. We want to find other creators like him. And with agentic technology and with other tools, you can find either a large group or a small group of creators that look that way. But I think for all the folks at agencies, whether you're working on creator campaigns or not directly, you should be trying to make connections with, if it's another firm that's running the creator campaigns, make connections with them if you can, or talk to the brand about where are you running your creator campaigns. Do you want your ads to run on those same creators and creators like that or not? You might say, no, totally different strategy here, etc. I know, Brian, I know you guys do a lot of cool creator stuff as well, but how do the brands you think you work with, again, some of them being really big brands, I know there's times to connect creator campaigns and ad campaigns, and there's times not to, but sort of how do they think of it in general as an important strategy?
So in the past couple of years, it's really become, for Toyota at least. I mean, we do it for all of our clients, but I think Toyota is probably the shining example of this exact instance, where we've really leaned into the creators and the kind of the brand, passionists, if you will, that really just love their vehicles. And by opening up the door for creator content to live within the ad space in a pretty meaningful way, we're finding that creators are not only willing, but happy and excited to submit their stuff, knowing that there's a really solid chance that it'll make its way into our spots, not only just on YouTube, but even into broadcast. So when we're talking about it being, YouTube TV or other YouTube platforms being akin to broadcast, when we're producing some of these assets for broadcast purposes, I think that's a testament to taking a content creator that was either producing something for social or producing something for YouTube, utilizing those in our standard broadcast spots. But even the ultimate culmination this last year, either this last year or the year prior, we took 4 of our influencers and put them in a local Super Bowl ad, just highlighting the fact that, like, no, please send us your stuff. We'll take it. We'll put it on out of home. We'll put it on billboard. Like we'll blow you up. And I think it's been a mutual excitement factor of, not only are we getting all of this just tremendous visual and video content from people, it's an authentic, so it's not scripted, it's not, they're just sending us what they want to piece together, and it really makes for really compelling advertising as we're getting that really authentic voice and really unique and creative showcasing of what these vehicles are capable of.
Yeah, I think what you hit on that's so on target is when people are on YouTube and presumably watching creators talk about things, if they then see an ad where it's a creator endorsing a product, it's a lot more resonant with them than, if it was just a brand ad with the brand itself saying we're great, we're great. It's like this creator that just kind of comes with a little bit sense of objectivity, saying like, "Ah, we love Toyota," and it's very powerful. And even some of those don't have to be highly produced, right? And so there's lots of cool ways that agencies can we're doing some cool things with folks now where we can find creators talking about the brand and we can very quickly help them use that creative in their ad campaigns and so forth. So it's definitely something we suggest. The other kind of just basic thing that that I mentioned is talk to them about their channel. See what content they have on their channel. Red Bull's an obvious example of a channel that's very big. It's kind of the #1 food channel in terms of size. Now they've, I don't want to say cheated, but they've gotten that way because they've have all this extreme sports content on there. So they're not just creating content about how great Red Bull tastes. Obviously, they have all this extreme sports content, and there's lots of examples of this. But even if you're working with smaller brands or different types of brands, try to find ways to how are they running their YouTube channel? We manage YouTube channels for a lot of companies, and we found when we tie that to their ad campaigns, it also has like a 1+1 = 3 situation, because you can see what's working on each. You can optimize based on what's working on each. You can actually really measure a lot better. Um, Chris, I know you guys aren't specifically managing YouTube channels for folks, but I know you've talked about this as an important thing to look at, just to get insights on like the video strategy of the brand, even if it lives in another part of the brand than the media team, how it can, just kind of give you a sense of their creative directives and so forth.
Absolutely. Going back to your original point about this 360-degree approach, we tend to try and think about, what we're doing as, there are brands and there's consumers. There's a line that connects them, and that consists of paid, owned, and earned media.
Yeah.
And we try as media people to kind of stick our noses in as many of those areas as possible,
Yeah.
whether it's creator or the organic or the paid portion. But to your point, when you look at the organic presence on YouTube, I think for us as media people, we need to take that into account, because ultimately what we're doing on YouTube is going to eventually lead them to this place. And so we need to be very aware and very cognizant of what's happening in the organic presence, as we're going out and cultivating, a greater audience for these brands.
Absolutely. And there's nothing there, there's all not nothing, but there's almost nothing as fire to increase the subscribers and the views on a channel than to run a paid ad campaign too. So it's in all of our interests to be kind of tied to the teams that are driving success on the channels, because if they know that the people running the ad campaigns can fuel that growth, then it's a great partnership. And then the last thing is just insights. Like obviously, like this is part of what we do is insights, but there's lots of YouTube insights companies out there that can help you understand, like, for example, how is your organic presence on YouTube compared to your competitors? That would be one thing you could look at. Then on the ad side of things, what types of content are driving performance in your category? So for example, this is a chart for the alcohol industry in a certain time frame, the types of content that was driving the highest VCR, but you can do this for other KPIs as well. So I think again, the message is just having like more of a holistic view of all of this for your clients. I think we've covered a lot, but we want to make sure we have a little bit of time for questions. So I'm gonna end there and let Kevin. I think we've gotten some questions over the transom, but I'll let you ask some questions of us, and we'll do our best to answer it. I'll just say also that I know that the 4A's folks, we love working with them. They're going to post this deck. I think some people ask that.
Yep.
They're going to post this video and the access to the video that has the deck. If you need anything from me, feel free to email me directly. If you have questions for our panelists, you can also email me or 4A's and we can get questions to them. So thanks for all of that. With that, I will turn it to Kevin for any questions we've got.
Great. Thank you all. This has been excellent. So it's maybe not a question, but I think it brings up an interesting question. They mentioned kind of PMax. It automatically optimizes between channels, so you don't have control. I think controls come up a number of times today, that sort of balance between AI and automation and control, and that being problematic sometimes for agencies. But they mentioned specifically that you need to have multiple formats. The creative team has to build those out, and then they may not even run. So how do you kind of, I guess, when you're looking at these types of solutions, PMax, demand gen, or otherwise, how do you make sure that your teams aren't necessarily doing more work than they even were before to use these tools?
Yeah, and I can take that, and then anyone else can jump in. But we are finding that most of the campaigns we run are running more on YouTube than on the other areas. So we get that question, like, should we even be doing demand gen if we're still getting a lot of the performance out of YouTube? Are they just jamming in these other places like Gmail and Discovery? I think at that point, Google's getting better about letting you opt out of some of these other areas in the ad formats that where it used to be sort of like you're going to get all of them. But then at that point, if you start opting out of them, then why even do it at all? Like, just run on YouTube and just do it. So you have that option to just say, like, I don't want to do this. I just want YouTube. All right, then don't run demand gen or PMax if that's what you want. If you're fine creating a little more content, I mean, we haven't found the creation of like text ads and so forth hard for us as a brand. But I'm sure as an agency, that means you going to the brand and trying to get that, and that takes time. So again, it's all part of what you have to think about. And, Melissa and team, I don't know if you have any thoughts on how to deal with that extra creative ask that you have to make for these things.
I think in our world, creative always poses a challenge, right? So the rise of automation was necessarily born out of that. But when I spoke at the AI Innovation Summit last week, what we came up with was AI is not always the solution to your problems. And I think it comes with two controversial questions. If you had more levers and control, what would you do with it? And is that the best time in terms of all the things that we have to do as marketers, as media experts, as creative professionals for you to spend that time in? So I think it's natural to feel certain things about automation and AI, and adoption is really high, but confidence is really low. But the reality is you have to create a lot of content for everything, right? So it's for the influencers, for the blog posts, for the SEO, everything has to be created. I think it's getting back to the drawing table of starting with that narrative of the story. Where does it actually live? Mapping for those mind states. And then where does automation come in to help accelerate that at scale? Versus where do you really need the hard and fast controls manually, because it's going to unlock something that's going to empower your job better or lead you down a better insight. So I think, there's conversations that need to be sussed out within every organization, with every brand and agency relationship to come to the table together. And that's what I love about AI the most, is that it's forcing conversations that we kind of put to the wayside just for speed to market's sake, to really do the hard work and be honest and truthful of what we can expect out of each other, but also what we can drive the brand towards.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that sometimes the lack of control doesn't necessarily mean that the benefits of having it are as high as we think they might be. I think everyone just doesn't like to necessarily lose it. Another question that came in is, how does YouTube Shorts stack up compared to other short form video placements when it comes to attention?
I can tout on that one. So this is going to be inclusive of YouTube Shorts, but it's again just kind of comparing YouTube as a whole to other channels. So it's somewhat answering the question. But when I was talking about Adelaide and kind of what they were spitting out, for our social channels, we were typically seeing an attention score between like 30 and 40, and it's on a scale of 1 to 100. display typically about 20 or so, online video about 50, 60. YouTube regularly will hit above 90. So if we're comparing just YouTube in general at a 90 versus, online video at a 60, our shorts, I want to say we're kind of in the 70s or 80s range, but again, comparative to social platforms at the 30, 40 range, it's a significant bump versus the other channels. And for those that aren't aware, attention is really looking at, exposure to the ad, time on screen, down funnel conversion, and at times eye tracking, where it's on page. It's just kind of assessing the overall quality of the placement. And we've seen tremendous lifts in attention scores. Not that I know the question says attention time, but attention scores have been significantly elevated on shorts versus other platforms.
Yeah, Kevin, one of the things we've seen, and not necessarily attention metrics, but we did look at some head-to-head comparisons between, say, TikTok and Shorts for one client of ours. One of the things that we did see, while TikTok had a greater click-through rate, more clicks, Shorts actually had better response for a fairly, intricate sell. And so we tended to take that as a proxy for attention or interest based on the fact that people were going through the entire process and filling out an RFI form and things of that nature through Shorts than they were through TikTok, even though we were seeing a greater number of clicks through the other platform.
Oh, I think you're on mute still, Kevin.
So many different windows open.
That's
Another thing that we spoke a little bit about brand suitability in a number of different contexts, and I think comfort with trying some of these different solutions out. But I think maybe what the question is that I had is brand suitability still as big a concern for clients, or is it starting to change now that some of these tools like Matt, you mentioned like AI curation and other things, like if the performance is there and the outcomes are there, are brands becoming a little bit more trusting that these types of solutions are actually doing what they're designed to do and less focused on, like you mentioned, you've got 100,000 different that you're not going to curate it to that degree, right? So are they starting to evolve in the way that they're thinking about brand suitability to make some of these solutions more palatable?
I mean, I can say what I've seen, and then would love to hear from the panel. But we have seen sort of the definition of suitability evolve, where years ago it was a little bit just protective of protect me from scary stuff, protect me from something that's violent or sexual or political, and it's still that. But I've also seen it become more about relevance, which again is kind of the theme for this thing is like no one's going to be happy if you said, well, we kept you perfectly suitable, but none of the content was relevant to your audience, right?
Yeah.
Like suitability is that too, in my opinion, and that's become more of a definition, which is why curation is so important. Is it can't just be we gave you our ads on a bunch of suitable content. We didn't get any performance at all, right? It has to be,
Yeah.
it was the content was not just suitable, it was also relevant and it also performed. And the more you can have that Venn diagram where it's all those, it's never going to be perfect, but the more you can have that, the better is what I've seen. I don't know how the panel has seen it, but
Same. I would say precision and the ability to get really surgical with relevancy is key. And especially if we're talking about, creators having to produce all that creative, there's no benefit for them to scale that production if they're not getting the payoff to understanding how their message is really landing with those right audiences and what that next nurturing step is as the brand continues to evolve, but consumer patterns and cultural trends continue to evolve.
Yeah, and I think Matt, you made a really good point. The suitable and relevant inventory and environments can provide performance. I'm a firm believer in that, and I think that sometimes we tend to think that performance is thinking back to PMAX is the black box. who knows what sort of ridiculous inventory we're running on, and that's what performance is. It's kind of junk. But I really do believe that, quality, suitable, relevant content and inventory can really provide the performance that I think a lot of our brands are looking for.
The next question I wanted to make sure we touched on this one a little bit too is kind of more around the org design and who does what. Brian, you spoke to a little bit about the way your teams work as well. Could you each kind of touch on the agency side? Could you each kind of touch on the way that you have your team structured to whether it's the SEM, the different channels, right? The different options that are available within YouTube's environment, where those kind of sit within your agencies?
Yeah, so right now, if we look at PMax, anytime we're utilizing it, it's really dependent on that specific channel that necessitates that PMax buy. So I think, for instance, if you want to buy Gmail, if you want to buy Google Maps or Waze, I'm trying to think if there's another one that is really only accessible via PMax, that's your option.
Yeah.
So, like on McDonald's, for instance, there's not a whole lot of reason for us to participate in search, and people aren't searching out burger metrics and whatnot. But they do use navigation, so navigation's a huge one for us. And so, we'll have to utilize PMax because of that. But fortunately, they were able to kind of curate, as I was mentioning before, a separate thing that is just nav focused. But because it's not search related, it's handled by our digital planning team as they would if they were working with like a Waze. Before Waze kind of went under. So it's kind of dependent. Toyota being very search heavy, any sort of PMax activities would be handled by the search team there. So it kind of depends on the needs of the brand and which part of PMax you're utilizing. I think pertaining to the question in terms of like, where does YouTube Select fit? When we have a channel that we believe is worthwhile in its investment on its merits alone, we'll just invest in that channel and optimize accordingly. So it won't be part of a PMax buy, and it will live as part of whichever group is handling, be it online video or some sort of display initiative or whatnot, that respective group would handle that. But we very cautiously err on the side of not a whole lot of PMax unless we really have to.
Melissa, how about you?
Very similar to Brian's structure internally. It really starts with being able to triage where do brands sit today? How do we look at the specific platforms and elements around it? And then where do the assets sit? And how can we do the holistic payoff when it affords the opportunity to do so, versus when do we have to take a very myopic, concentrated focus around one particular aspect of it? But these decision trees allow us to go to this reasoning of if this, then that, to create the best conditions for the holistic picture that we want to elicit out.
And just on my side, I think, and we had talked about this at one point, we try and keep as much of the planning and buying process together within the planning and buying team. While we do have specialists in the search area, we try and make sure that digital, social, those sorts of things sit with the person who's actively buying for the client themselves. I think the bigger question is going back to Matt's point about a 360-degree look. How do we bring things like creator or organic into the media team? Because far, more often than not, those are handled by another agency or someone else. And to really create that holistic look, I think we need to think about how we bring that into the media team in some sort of capacity in the future.
Excellent. Well, we do have additional questions, but I think we're running so tight on time that we wouldn't have enough to answer them adequately. But as we mentioned, we will share the recording. We'll also share the deck. If there are additional questions, even the ones that we have here, we'll surface this to the team and panel, and maybe we can find a way to put those on our site so we have some responses to those as well. But Brian, Matt, Chris, and Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really great session. Everybody that in attendance, thanks for joining us too, and have a great rest of the day. Take care, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.